So what are the principles of your political position?
Um, well, one of the principles is that you don't need to get into what I believe because I think it's a very um, insidious concept that we have to be friends with people who agree with us or to discuss politics at all. There's this concept that, politics have to permeate every aspect of every person's life and they have to constantly be discussed, and this is something I'm completely opposed to. I think it's really a horrible idea, and it's tribalism, which I'm not entirely opposed to at its worst. If someone is if you're having an emergency at home, you don't quickly run a scan. Oh, well, I want to call this person, but they voted the wrong way or something like that. So my political views, and you're referring to anarchism, it's simply being against politics as a mechanism of resolving disputes. And, everything just follows as a consequence of that. We can unpack it, but that's basically it in a nutshell.
Is that a typical perspective on anarchism?
I don't know that there is a typical perspective. There's different schools of anarchism. There's there's an anarchist lapel pins website, and they have the standard flag of anarchism is the black flag, but there's black and red, black and gold, black and pink, black and blue. So all the different schools of anarchism. So, and they disagree very heavily, but it's going to be a Venn diagram.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, the main reason I wasn't necessarily trying to agree, but I'm curious. I'm interested. I don't see many people saying that they're anarchists in 2021. So why do you find it compelling? What's interesting about it?
Well, I think it closely explains what we're seeing in politics. I think it's an effective predictor of future social political behavior. I think it's the only worldview that allows someone to have a clean conscience with what they advocate politically. And I think that's just basically what it comes down to. I also want to point out that anyone who has a radical philosophy, is going to come off as either a moron or a lunatic. If you told me that you had a friend who's quite tall, and I said, how tall? And you said, he's 6'10" or whatever, 2.1 meters. It's like, okay, that's pretty tall. But if you said that they're, 10 meters tall or they're purple tall, it's nonsensical, right? So at a certain point, once an ideology is so divorced from what is presented as, part of the normal realm of discourse, people will automatically, preemptively dismiss it, although that's decreasingly the case.
How do you transition from a situation where we are now to one where there's ever anarchy at large? By definition, you can't have an anarchist party.
Well, sure you can. They have had them in the past. I mean, they could just be there to kind of gin up the works and cause anarchism. It just means voluntary association. Now, anarchists are opposed to political activity, but you can certainly say, like, look, I'm opposed to war, but this is a case where it's a self-defense situation. So there's the argument to be made for that with things like voting. I'm sorry, what was the start of the question?
Trying to work out how you transition.
Oh, how you get there. Yeah. So anarchism isn't a location, it's a relationship. And the vast proportion of our lives, especially in the West, are anarchist. You and I have an anarchist relationship. There's no possibility we're calling the police. If there was some kind of we were somewhere together and we got violent, we're still not calling the state. If we were at a bar, I'd get kicked out or you'd get kicked out. So this claim that all kind of peace and prosperity is a function of the state is really, from the anarchist perspective, akin to saying, well, if it wasn't for all these exorcists, we'd all be possessed. The norm between human beings is peace, not on a large scale, because that's a function of governments. Governments give war. But we generally tend to be more peaceful than not, for the simple reason, not because people are basically good, but because violence is expensive. Because once there's violence in a situation, then other people who aren't at all associated, you see this in bar fights. Like, people jump in to try to quash it because people understand very easily that these things tend to escalate and then it becomes very expensive to everyone. It's asymmetrical. Let's put a stop to it, right quick. So how do you get there? Well, there's certain mechanisms. It's delegitimizing the state. It's encouraging aggression, not violent aggression, but just interpersonal aggression and hostility towards agents of the state. It's casting aspersions upon democracy and democratic process, and it's not a numbers game. So, a lot of people think, well, you're never getting a majority to agree with you, but your win condition of having a majority is based on democracy. Other systems do not base their win condition on having a majority of people agree with me, and they once every 4 years go into a ballot box and flick a switch.
It seems like at a small level, an interpersonal level, individual, me and you, we do have quite an anarchist relationship. But as you say, when you scale that up, is it realistic that you can allow an entire 330 million person country to exist like that?
Well, you wouldn't need it wouldn't be a country at that point. But let me give you an example of how this is already a status quo. Every country is in a state of anarchy towards every other country, right? So if a Canadian kills an American in Mexico, I don't know what happens. You don't know what happens, but we know that there's a process put in place. So if security was private, where it would be a function of your cell phone instead of your geography, if I attacked you I have one security firm, you have another one, and we're at someone else's domicile, what would the situation be? We don't know, but we know it would be resolved in advance without the consumer having to work it out, for the simple reason that if I'm on one phone company and you're at another, it works out and we have no idea what happened behind the scenes. If their goal is to provide security and generate profit at that, they're going to make it as easy for the users as possible, as opposed to governments who generate funding and generate revenue as a function of creating problems and creating stress and having that as an excuse to raise taxes and seize more assets from the populace.
Does anarchism need capitalism in order to facilitate that then?
No, the original anarchists were violently anti-capitalist, and they viewed capitalism, in a sense, more similar to what we would call nowadays corporatism, and their analysis of this is spot on. 2020, we saw the systemic destruction of medium and small businesses that was cheered on by corporate America, both with riots and looting here in the States and also the COVID lockdowns. It did wonders for companies like Amazon and Walmart. All the little stores here in New York that I'm a fan of, they went out of business because they couldn't sustain it. So what the original anarchist people like Emma Goldman and even before her, Bakunin and people like that, Kropotkin, what they were concerned about is this collusion between large business and the state. And in that regard, they are spot on that this is the worst of all, well, not the worst of all worlds, but it's pretty darn bad.
And by getting rid of the state, you can get rid of that collusion.
Right, because you're not going to have a monopoly without the government forcing everyone to be a subscriber to that product. You would have what governments do in every industry is create barriers to entry for smaller companies, because those offer competition to the large dinosaurs that have effectively seized large parts of the market in the past.
I had Andy Ngo on the show last week, and he said that Antifa identify as anarcho-communists and revolutionary Marxists. How close or far is this from the purity of a normal anarchist?
It's closer than it's pretty darn close. A lot of ANCAPs, narco-capitalists, think Antifa doesn't have a right to call themselves anarchists, and they certainly do. The early anarchists were especially in the UK. The term in the UK was synonymous with terrorist. This is why the Sex Pistols song, Anarchy in the UK, was so shocking, because Johnny Rotten is explicitly saying, I want to destroy passersby. It was this, and they were also called nihilists at the time. This was an ideology where we're going to have violent revolution. We're going to, blow up businesses or business people and assassinate. So there is this very long history, for better or for worse, with the black flag that Antifa is, in regard to self, in some regards, in some senses, as an heir to.
Does that not make it difficult to try and get people on board with, though? If the thin end of the wedge, like the front end of the funnel, is rioting and looting and violence and black flags and black bloc, that doesn't seem like a very fun world for me to step into.
I am disturbed by how much of a recruiting tool that has now become in America, because the degree to which people have become comfortable with violence towards state actors and people who they regard as opposed to them is happening at an astronomical pace. When the Capitol was stormed a couple of weeks ago, the protesters, rioters, whatever you want to call them, they put up a gallows in front of Capitol Hill. And I think there is an enormous sense, especially with these lockdowns, an enormous sense of people becoming comfortable with the idea of doing very bad things. And I'm extremely concerned about this because violence follows its own logic. It's not the kind of thing where, you know, if you just shoot the king, everything resolves itself. Once you start going down that road, no one has any idea where it's going to end up, other than what you are guaranteed of is more oppression, more violence, innocent people being hurt. And it's really something of enormous concern to me in the beginning of 2021. And because there is this attempt by the corporate media here to kind of sweep it under the rug. And when you have a population that's become comfortable with the idea of violence and they're kind of ignored, A, they're going to be able to do it and no one's going to see it coming. And B, they're going to be encouraged to do it because now they feel that they've been made invisible, nothing to lose.
Didn't you say at the very beginning, though, that being averse to state actors was part of the anarchists' agenda? Yeah,
but averse doesn't mean like shooting people in the head. It means contempt. It means do not regard the cops as heroes. I was on Tim Pool not that long ago with Alex Jones, and one of my favorite Britishisms is they call the cops the filth. In fact, this is actually a funny story. I was on the BBC radio, like this would have been 15 years ago. And I always thought, and maybe I'm wrong, that the British are a lot more culturally liberal than the States, that we're all more fuddy-duddies here. Maybe this was a misconception. And the interviewer said, "Oh, Michael, you know, this blog you have, you guys take a lot of shots at the cops." And I said, "Well, it's like my dad. I was an immigrant from the Soviet Union, Russia." I said, "My dad always told me," and I said this innocently, you know, because I thought this is Europe; they're going to have the same perspective as the Russian perspective. My dad always told me, wherever you go, wherever you end up in the world, the stupidest people are always the cops. The guy audibly gasped. And he said, "Michael, this is a family show," and changed the subject. And I was very surprised to see that having been the case. But that's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
So Carl Benjamin says this, and I totally agree with him, that the British are very procedural. Like if you look at there was those scenes at the Capitol Hill riots where the rioters had broken into the Capitol, but as they were walking through one of the main halls or atriums, had stayed inside of the ropes.
Yes.
That is so British. That is precisely the sort of thing that a British person would do. You know, they'd make sure. I saw a guy the other day who was outside of a butcher's shop. This is before lockdown, and he had gloves on, mask on, smoking. Gloves on, mask on, smoking outside of it. Very procedural in the way that we go about things. And perhaps that's contributed to it a little bit because obviously the police are basically the enforcement of the procedure.
Right.
What about, so you mentioned about the Capitol Hill and the other riots that we've seen over the last year. Do you look on that and see it as a misuse of your particular political ideology?
Oh, no. I think whenever you have politicians hiding in fear, as the way they had the rest of us hiding in fear locked in our homes for a year, the imagery there cannot ever be unseen. Everyone's going to stand there and tell you how strong the regime is and how powerful it is. And when you have 20 people who can just walk into the Capitol, including a guy from Burning Man, I think literally he was a Burning Man person, this demonstrates that, for better or for worse, this is not a system that is going to be able to protect you. And that is the big selling point of the state. It's that you give up your choices and we're going to keep you safe. Big Brother's watching. I know they have those signs unironically in London. And it's like, well, they're lying to you. So if they can't even keep these, you know, D-list barbarians out from their, you know, sacred temple, they're not going to be able to protect you. And this is going to cause a lot of people to recalibrate or their view of the state and the state authorities.
So you see people break into the Capitol building or take downtown Portland or create a Capitol Hill autonomous zone. How do you stop people from losing so much faith in society as a whole that they become nihilistic. Even if they don't necessarily subscribe to the anarchist movement, you could just think, oh God, like I had all of my faith in the state, and now what have I got left to support me?
Well, that's the goal, is to have them to lose all faith in the state. Now, if there's people whose entire sense of identity was faith in the state and now they feel lost, I can't help you. You're not one of my people. I think both of those positions are untenable and kind of sad. But I think once it's like everyone leaving home. It's like once you realize that this is all a sham, this is enormously liberating, because now you're either free to, or in a negative sense, are forced to confront your own destiny and confront your own choices. This is one of the things that drove people crazy about, these masks. They're being told this is giving you a sense, if you follow orders, you're going to be safe. It doesn't matter what the efficacy is. What matters is I get to be obedient, and in turn, I'm being guaranteed that my life isn't in danger. It's nonsensical, but that's where we are.
Is there a valley of despair that newly indoctrinated anarchists tend to slip into? There must be a point at which you go, right, okay, all of the old rules are gone, and none of the new rules and the new freedoms, liberties that must come along with being an anarchist they haven't arrived yet.
Well, yeah, but that's not exclusive to anarchism. That's the danger of cynicism, right? Once you realize, you've been lied to all your life, and not mistakes, systemically lied to, there's the danger of getting into this stupid catcher in the rye mindset. Everyone's a phony. This all sucks. I'm going to listen to, The Cure, write in my diary with fingerless gloves. So my goal is to kind of speak to those people and be like slap them upside the head, metaphorically, and be like, you're being silly. This is teenage, nonsense. And now is your opportunity to be an adult and make your mark on the world, or just find your bliss.